All right, let's dive right into the Weimar Republic. We're going to be looking at a really pivotal period in German history, kind of from the ashes of World War I through to 1925, just to see, how this new republic came to be and what challenges it faced right off the bat. You guys sent in some great excerpts from a historical text that focuses on some of the key events and figures, perfect for a deep dive. So to help us unpack all this, we have with us an expert in this era. So picture it, Germany 1918. War's over, they've lost, country's kind of in shambles, food scarce, rationing, Spanish flu running rampant, morale, well, let's just say not exactly at an all-time high, not exactly the perfect start for a brand new republic, right? But before we even get to the Weimar Republic's birth, we need to kind of go back and look at what led to the old order crumbling. So let's start with a little quiz question. What major event in 1917 really weakened Germany's position in the war?
I'd say that was the United States entering the war.
Now, why was this such a game changer?
Well, Germany had been fighting for 3 years by that point. And the U.S. joining the Allies, it just brought in, all these fresh troops, tons of resources. It really just swung things in the Allies' favor, made a German victory pretty much impossible.
So, yeah, pretty grim situation. But I've heard it wasn't just, the military defeat that pushed the Kaiser to abdicate. There was something else at play, right?
You're right, yeah. There was this hope that maybe if they got rid of the Kaiser, Germany could get a better deal in the peace talks. Looking back, it might have been a little naive.
Bit of political maneuvering. But things weren't exactly calm back home either, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't there a mutiny like in Kiel?
Yes. In late 1918, German sailors in Kiel, they were ordered to take part in what many saw as like a suicidal last stand. They just refused. And it spread to other ports really fast, like Hamburg, Bremen. It was clear the German people, even the military, were just done.
So you've got the Kaiser stepping down, the war lost, and all this unrest brewing within the country. It's in this chaotic setting that the Treaty of Versailles is signed. Now, I've got another question for you. How much was Germany ordered to pay in reparations?
I think it was 20 billion gold marks.
That's a good guess, but it was actually way higher. A whopping 6.6 billion pounds, which is, if you convert that, over 132 billion gold marks. You can imagine how that went over with the German people.
Oof, I can't even imagine having that kind of debt, especially for a country that was already on its knees.
It was a heavy burden, to say the least. And the financial hit wasn't the only thing that stung, right? What other consequences did the Treaty of Versailles have on Germany?
Well, they had to take full responsibility for the war. It was a massive blow to their national pride, and they also lost huge chunks of territory.
Can you give us some specifics? What territories are we talking about?
Okay, so they lost the Polish corridor. It basically cut Germany in two and separated them from East Prussia. It was really strategic. And then there was Alsace-Lorraine, a region that's rich in resources, which went back to France. Oh, and we can't forget the Saar coalfields, a crucial industrial area. That went to France for 15 years. Honestly, it felt more like a punishment than a peace treaty.
Yeah, no wonder many Germans saw this as a dictated peace. Like they had no say in it whatsoever. It must have created a deep sense of resentment.
Absolutely. It really fueled this narrative of, victimhood and injustice. And later on, movements like the Nazi Party really exploited that.
So on the one hand, you have this incredibly unpopular treaty, and then on the other, you have the birth of the Weimar Republic, this new experiment in democracy. What were some of the key things that made the Weimar Constitution unique, even groundbreaking for its time?
Well, first off, it gave all citizens over 20 the right to vote. Men and women, that was pretty progressive back then. It also enshrined basic rights, freedom of speech, assembly, the right to join trade unions. On paper, it looked like a truly modern and democratic constitution.
It does sound pretty impressive. But I've heard there were also some weaknesses built in, some cracks in the foundation, so to speak. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, unfortunately there is. One of the biggest issues was the proportional representation system they adopted. So basically, seats in the parliament, the Reichstag, were given out in proportion to the percentage of votes each party got.
Yeah, that sounds fair at first glance. What was the problem with that?
Well, while it seems fair, it ended up creating a super fragmented political scene. Lots of small parties, some with pretty extreme views, they were able to get seats in the Reichstag. And this made it really, really difficult to form stable governments, which, as you can imagine, led to a lot of political instability.
Sounds like a recipe for gridlock and infighting.
It definitely was. And to make things worse, they had this clause, Article 48, which gave the president the power to just suspend constitutional rights and basically rule by decree during emergencies.
Yeah. Article 48, that infamous clause. It was meant to be like a safeguard, but it ended up having some pretty unintended consequences, right?
Exactly. It basically meant that the president could sidestep the whole democratic process and become a dictator, albeit temporarily. In a republic that was already dealing with so many problems, that kind of unchecked power, it was just asking for trouble.
So you've got this fragile new government trying to find its footing while carrying the weight of a hated treaty. And to top it all off, the public was pretty disillusioned with the Weimar government right from the start, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They were often called the November criminals, for signing that Treaty of Versailles. It's hard to build trust and legitimacy when you're constantly associated with a decision that's seen as, a national humiliation.
So internally, you have this political turmoil and a public that feels betrayed. And then from both the left and the right come these challenges that just threaten to topple the Weimar Republic in its early years. First up, we have the Spartacist Revolt. Can you tell us a bit about who the Spartacists were and what they were trying to achieve?
They were a communist group, really inspired by what had happened in Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution. They wanted to see that same kind of radical change in Germany to overthrow the Weimar Republic and establish a socialist state.
So they were just armchair revolutionaries. They actually tried to seize power, right?
Yes. In January 1919, they started a huge worker strike in Berlin. Like over 100,000 people were out on the streets, and they even managed to take over some important buildings, newspaper offices, communication centers. For a bit there, it really seemed like they might actually pull it off.
That must have been a pretty tense time. What happened? Why didn't they succeed?
Well, in the end, the revolt was just poorly organized. And it didn't have much widespread support. A lot of the protesters, they weren't sure about the leadership or where things were going, so a lot of them just went home.
So the revolution kind of fizzled out. But I bet the Weimar government wasn't taking any chances after that.
No, not at all. They unleashed the Freikorps, these paramilitary groups made up mostly of ex-soldiers who were vehemently anti-communist. The Freikorps just crushed the uprising. That week of fighting became known as Bloody Week.
Sounds like a pretty tragic and violent episode. What happened to the Spartacist leaders?
Sadly, both Liebknecht and Luxemburg were captured and murdered by the Freikorps. It really cemented their status as martyrs for the left.
So the Spartacist revolt was a failed attempt to overthrow the government from the left. But it wasn't the last challenge that the Weimar Republic faced. Now we're going to shift our attention to a challenge from the opposite end of the political spectrum, the Munich Putsch, led by a young and ambitious Adolf Hitler. Before we get into the details, can you tell me what year did this attempted coup take place?
That would be 1933, the same year Hitler became chancellor.
You're close, but not quite. The Munich Putsch actually happened earlier in November of 1923. It's important to remember that this wasn't Hitler's first attempt to grab power.
Ah, right. It's easy to forget about those early, less successful attempts when we know how things eventually played out.
It's a good reminder that history is full of twists and turns. So let's rewind back to 1923. Set the scene for us. What was going on in Germany that made Hitler and the Nazi Party think this was the right time to make their move?
Well, Germany was in a full-blown economic crisis. Hyperinflation was completely out of control, and people were really struggling to make ends meet. It created this atmosphere of fear, frustration, and desperation, which Hitler was really good at exploiting.
So the stage was set for a charismatic leader to come in and promise solutions. Tell us about the infamous beer hall putsch. How did it all go down?
So in November 1923, Hitler and his Nazi party, they saw an opportunity in all this chaos and decided to go for it. They stormed a political meeting at a beer hall in Munich, fired a few leads into the air, and declared a national revolution.
Sounds pretty dramatic. Did this grand entrance work? Did he win over the crowd?
Well, Hitler, he used his usual mix of charisma and intimidation to try and force some of the important local politicians to support him. He then led a march on Munich, hoping to take control of the city and then ultimately the whole country.
It was a bold plan, even if a little reckless. Did he succeed?
Not even close. As the Nazis marched towards the city center, they were met by armed police. A short but violent clash broke out. 16 Nazis were killed. Hitler was wounded and arrested.
So not exactly the glorious revolution he'd imagined, but this wasn't the end of the road for Hitler, was it?
No, not at all. He got a pretty light sentence for his role in the putsch, and he used that time in prison to write Mein Kampf, his political manifesto. In it, he laid out his ideology and his ambitions for the future. It really set the stage for his eventual rise to power.
It's incredible how this early failure actually helped shape his path.
It's a good reminder that even seemingly small events can have huge consequences down the line.
So we've talked about the political challenges, the uprisings, the power grabs, but there's another major factor at play here that really crippled the Weimar Republic, the economy. You mentioned hyperinflation before. Can you give us a sense of just how bad things were in the early 1920s? Like, paint us a picture.
Imagine people having to use wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Their savings completely wiped out almost overnight. Prices changing so fast that people were rushing to spend their money before it lost even more value. It was economic chaos on a scale never seen before.
Sounds absolutely terrifying. What caused this hyperinflation? Was it solely because of the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations payments?
The reparations were definitely a huge factor, but they weren't the only cause. When Germany fell behind on its payments in 1923, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr Valley. That was Germany's industrial heartland. They were hoping to force them to pay up.
The Ruhr occupation. Yeah, I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I really understand what kind of impact it had.
Well, the Ruhr Valley was Germany's main source of coal and steel production. When it was occupied, the German government, kind of in an act of defiance, encouraged passive resistance. Workers went on strike. Production stopped.
So no goods being produced, no money coming in.
Yeah.
How did the Weimar government try to address this?
They made a decision that had disastrous consequences. They started printing money like crazy. They thought they could cover their expenses and pay the striking workers.
So that's what fueled the hyperinflation.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how trying to fix an economic problem by printing more money can just backfire spectacularly.
Yeah, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. So it's clear that the Ruhr occupation was a real turning point. What happened next? Did the French and Belgians eventually withdraw?
They did, but not before causing serious damage to the German economy. Hyperinflation had already taken hold, and the political landscape became even more unstable.
So you've got political turmoil, economic meltdown, and this deep sense of national humiliation. It's incredible that the Weimar Republic even survived those first few years at all.
It really is a testament to their resilience. But these early crises, they really showed how fragile this new republic was, and it paved the way for even more turbulent times to come.
Well, you've definitely set the stage for a dramatic final chapter. We've seen how the war ended, the birth of the Weimar Republic, the struggles it faced, both politically and economically. But the story's not over yet. Join us for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll explore how the Weimar Republic, battered but still standing, navigates the treacherous waters of the mid-1920s. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Weimar Republic. We left off with Germany, kind of reeling from all this political upheaval and economic disaster. It's the mid-1920s now, and the Weimar Republic, it's battered, but it's still trying to make this whole democracy thing work. But we know from history that things eventually take a pretty dark turn. Yeah. So how does this fragile republic, carrying all this baggage, how does it try to navigate the years ahead?
Well, the mid-1920s are often called the Golden 20s in Germany. It was a time of relative stability and even some prosperity for the Weimar Republic.
Golden 20s. That sounds like a complete 180 from what we've been talking about. What changed?
Well, one thing was that they finally got a handle on that hyperinflation crisis. They introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, which really helped stabilize the economy. And it restored some confidence.
No more wheelbarrows of cash.
Yeah.
That's a relief. What else contributed to this brief period of calm?
On the international stage, Germany started to be reintegrated into the global community. They were allowed to join the League of Nations in 1926, which was, a huge symbolic victory. It showed that other nations were willing to accept Germany back into the fold.
So they're not the outcast of Europe anymore. Did this shift in international relations have any any real tangible effects?
Yes, it led to the Locarno treaties in 1925, which, really helped ease tensions with France and Belgium. Those were the countries that had occupied the Ruhr Valley. So this was a big step towards reconciliation.
It sounds like things were actually looking up for the Weimar Republic. Was this a genuine turning point or just a temporary break?
I think sadly it was more of a temporary break. While things were calmer on the surface, there were still some deep-seated problems. Those underlying weaknesses in the Weimar Constitution that we talked about before, like proportional representation in Article 48, they were still there, just waiting to be exploited.
And I have a feeling that another major crisis was lurking just around the corner. Am I right?
You are. The Great Depression hit Germany hard in 1929. It just shattered that fragile stability they had achieved. Unemployment went through the roof. Businesses collapsed. And people once again lost faith in the government's ability to solve their problems.
So just as things seemed to be getting better, the rug was pulled out from under them. How did the Weimar Republic respond to this new crisis?
Not very well, unfortunately. The political scene became even more polarized. Extremist parties on both the left and the right, they gained more and more support. The Nazis, with their promises of national revival and scapegoating of minorities, they were particularly good at taking advantage of people's fear and desperation.
It's scary how economic hardship can create such fertile ground for these types of extremist movements.
Yeah, it's a pattern we see throughout history, unfortunately. When people are struggling, they're more likely to listen to those who offer simple solutions, even if those solutions are dangerous or harmful.
So the Great Depression dealt a devastating blow to the Weimar Republic. But it wasn't just the economic crisis, was it? There were also political factors at play, right?
Yeah, the political system was becoming more and more dysfunctional. The constant coalition governments, the reliance on Article 48 to just bypass the Reichstag, it created this feeling that democracy itself was failing, and this perception just played right into the hands of the Nazis, who presented themselves as this strong, decisive alternative.
It's the tragic irony that the mechanisms that were meant to protect the Republic ended up being used to undermine it.
It really shows how important it is to not just have democratic institutions, but to also have a shared commitment to democratic values and a willingness to uphold them even when times are tough.
So we've got the Great Depression, political instability, and the rise of the Nazi Party. It sounds like the Weimar Republic is on its last legs. How did the Nazis ultimately seize control? Was it a sudden coup or a more gradual process?
It was more of a gradual takeover, a series of strategic moves that ended with Hitler being appointed chancellor in 1933.
Okay, walk us through those key events. How did they manage to go from a fringe group to the leaders of Germany in such a short amount of time?
Well, in the 1930 elections, the Nazis became the second largest party in the Reichstag. This gave them a legitimate platform to spread their message and influence policy, even though their ultimate goal was to destroy the democratic system.
So they used the system to destroy the system. That's chilling. What happened next?
In 1932, President Hindenburg, he was under pressure from conservative elites who saw Hitler as a way to stop communism. So they appointed Hitler as chancellor. They thought they could control him, use him for their own purposes.
It seems like a classic case of underestimating a dangerous demagogue.
Exactly. Once he was in power, Hitler moved fast to consolidate his control. He used the Reichstag fire, which was a suspected arson attack on the parliament building, as an excuse to suspend civil liberties and crack down on his political opponents.
So a manufactured crisis to justify a power grab. It's a tactic we've seen over and over throughout history.
It is, and it's a reminder of how fragile freedoms can be. With the Enabling Act of 1933, the Nazis basically gave themselves dictatorial powers, and that marks the end of the Weimar Republic and the beginning of Nazi Germany.
It's a sobering end to our deep dive. We've seen how a nation battered by war and burdened by a flawed peace really struggled to build a democracy. But ultimately, economic hardship, political instability, and the rise of extremism, it proved to be too much for the Weimar Republic to overcome.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember from this exploration of the Weimar Republic?
I think it really highlights the importance of strong democratic institutions, a healthy economy, and a society that's united against extremism. The Weimar Republic, it was weakened by flaws in its constitution, it was crippled by economic crisis, and it was ultimately torn apart by political divisions.
It's also a reminder that democracy is something we have to actively protect and nurture. It's not a given. It requires participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to stand up for democratic values, even when it's tough.
I couldn't agree more. The rise of the Nazi Party shows just how quickly a democracy can unravel when people become complacent or apathetic.
Well, this has been a fascinating, although a bit heavy, journey through history. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and helping us to understand this crucial period. And to you, listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Mm-hmm. After all, understanding the past can help us to navigate the challenges of the present. We're always up for more deep dives. So if you have any other topics you'd like us to explore, just send us your sources.